Ketchikan, Alaska News. Today I'm visiting with Phil Doherty at the Southeast Alaska Regional Dive Association. We're going to talk coronavirus and PSP testing and the economic impacts here in the city of Ketchikan. So I'm here with Phil Doherty with the SARDFA, which is a Southeast Alaska Regional Dive Fishery Association. Tell us a little bit about your professional history, Phil.
Well, I showed up in Ketchikan in 1978. I started working for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. That's the reason I came up here at that time. And I worked for the department from 1978 through 2006. But this position, the executive director's position of SARDFA, opened up. And it was actually one of those things that kind of prompted me to retire too. So.
Okay, the current crisis that I'm trying to address here, and this is the coronavirus and how that has financially impacted your divers. So can you, first of all, describe just briefly what it takes for a guy to go out on the ocean and collect a geoduck? We'll just focus on geoduck today.
Yeah. And there's about 60 active divers. It's a limited entry fishery, so not everyone, you have to get a permit. So they have these high pressure water hoses, and which is up on their vessel, and it's just like a high pressure water hose, like you wash your car with or something like that. So they go down into the beds. They're hookah divers, so their airlines are attached to the surface. And they go down to the beds and they see the geoduck clams in the substrate. Sometimes the necks are sticking up out of the sand, or you can see a little depression in the sand where the geoducks are. They put what's called their stinger, which is their end of the high pressure hose. They turn their valve on. The high pressure water disturbs the bottom, kind of liquefies the sand, and then they can reach all the way down, oftentimes to shoulder level. That's how deep the geoducks are, and they pluck them out of the bottom one by one.
That typical average price, say going back over 10 years, is essentially what?
It's about $6.50 a pound.
For that clam at the dock in Ketchikan?
Yes, that's what our divers get paid. Now over in, these are very high-end food product over in China. They are sold in live fish markets, so and that's what you get.
And that guy might pay at the restaurant
$100 a pound.
Wow.
So that's our fisheries here in Southeast Alaska. We normally harvest somewhere around 600 to 800,000 pounds each.
Million?
Yeah, we would, if we harvest no more geoduck clams this season, we would probably be short about $2.5 to $3 million, depending on the market. Right now, we have been closed. We have not been sampling for PSP, and we have not been harvesting any geoduck clams. And the same thing for British Columbia and Washington State. They're closed too, so I don't see this coronavirus going away here in the very near future. I think we're going to lose a big chunk of this season.
So can that be made up?
It can be made up. We have been in discussions with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and it's not like these geoducks are going anywhere. So it's not time right now to completely write this season off, but it's, at least in the short term, it's not looking good. So, if we talk about it from a localized economic impact, most of the divers are Alaskans, and there's quite a number of divers who live here in Ketchikan or Craig or Sitka. Those three towns probably make up the bulk of the divers. So you have 40 or 50 divers who live in and around here that aren't diving right now and aren't getting an income. You also have the 4 or 5 land-based companies that handle geoducks and box them up and send them overseas, and they need land-based help at the processing plants. So you have probably 100 or more people who would typically be handling and processing geoducks. They're not working. This is a small boat fishery, so it's really one diver, one boat. So, as I said, there's probably 60 or so divers participating in the fishery. So you have to have a crew member for each of the boat. So there's another 60 people here that are probably local that would be depending on the geoduck fishery to make it some money in the wintertime. And of course, you take 40 or 50 or 60 boats off the waterfront here in Ketchikan, they're not going to the fuel dock. They're not going to the grocery store. They're not going to, getting their boats fixed and the whole 9 yards. That's what a commercial fisheries is. You take, kind of a rule of thumb for every dollar made by a fisherman, you can expand that by $4 or $5 for economic impact into the community. The inter-island ferry, it's interesting. We've been in discussions with them. When the fishery, be it a sea cucumber fishery or the geoduck fishery, is occurring on the west coast of Prince of Wales, and you have a bunch of people here who live in Ketchikan, they'll run their boats around and they'll leave their boats in Craig for the winter time, and then they'll take the inter-island ferry back and forth a couple of times a week. So we make up a bulk of the passengers on the inter-island ferry at this time of the year, because everything, who else is going over to Prince of Wales is pretty slow, but 2 or 3 times a week we're putting 40 divers on the inter-island ferry, and it's an important source of income from them.
So we're here today with Jeremy Layton, who is a commercial harvest diver, and he harvests geoduck, sea cucumber. Do you have any others?
No urchins.
You know, urchins, yeah. So talk to us a little bit about how the coronavirus shutdown has affected you personally, your finances, your small business here on the Reliance.
Well, the coronavirus in the last, we heard about this before the Chinese New Year, which was about a month ago. And it was concerning then because all of a sudden the Chinese borders were getting shut down for live shipments of seafood. The people in China all of a sudden decided they weren't going to go out to eat. They didn't want to risk contracting the disease or the virus from going out to lunches, dinners, hanging out with mass amounts of people, which virtually shut down the geoduck fishery. We ended up as a committee and board voting to stop sampling because we had nowhere to ship it. So now we're stuck with about 50% of our quota in the ground with no end in sight to when we're going to be able to harvest it. We probably won't be able to harvest it until next season, which basically means we just lost out on 50% of our income.
Yeah, and that's affected not just you. We have a deckhand.
Oh, it affects a long string from the fuel dock to grocery stores to my deckhand, other divers, to processing facilities, to Alaska Airlines not getting the geoducks boxed and shipped out of Ketchikan.
What's typical if you just did an average number? You have, say, 60 divers, and the gross value of the catch is 10 million, whatever it is. What's an average diver make? And I'm not saying you personally, but
the last couple of years, I think the average diver's been about $75,000, $80,000, somewhere in that range for geoducks.
That's a gross income. They got all sorts of expenses on top of that.
Oh,
so.
Basically this season we've gotten to the point where we've paid all our standard expenditures. We've gotten half our quota out, which means we just broke that barrier, and now we're shut down.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeremy. Well, hope that this gets solved soon. So, Jeremy, describe geoduck diver's gear, the pump, and hoses and so forth.
So basically, we have a hydraulically driven geoduck pump. This puts out a pretty good amount of water. We can get, we run 2.5 inch hoses. We plug it in, and we get about, I don't know, probably 80 to 100 pounds of pressure out the other end with water, because you neck it down. You've got 1.5 inches, and by the time it comes out the end, you're down to 1/2 inch.
And that's one of the wands down here, you call it, or stinger?
This is our wand, and this is what we use to dig geoducks. So you're holding it, you hold it like this. You see a geoduck, and you stick it down in the sand, and the water's coming out of this end.
Right.
It liquefies the sand or blows the sand away from the geoduck. Once you get so far, you can grab the neck, and then you want this long enough to get past the body of the geoduck.
Right.
Or at least close to the same depth as the geoduck shell. That liquefies all the sand under it and around it, and then the geoduck will pop right out.
Right. And then you put it in this collection bag or mesh bag
From
here.
there, this is your bag. it's clipped to, you have a harness, there's a clip on it, and it sits here.
Yeah.
So you take the gooey, you know, you got your wand in one hand, you grab the gooey duck and throw it in there, and then you go to your next gooey duck and start digging.
Right on. Thanks for that explanation.